From the badge on the chest to the suit and tie, from the sweat on the steel to the public eye, clocking out the job, laying down the weight. Open up the mic, set the record straight. Tell me, who are you, brother? Tell me, who are you, sister? Tell me, who are you, boss? Getting down to the truth when the blue comes off.
Hey everybody, it's your girl Deshonda Carter here, but you can call me DC. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We have the lovely Nyasia Segure with us today. So I want you to clap it up for our guest today. So Nyasia, let's get into it, my
Yes,
dear.
let's get
First of
into
all,
it.
thank you so much for being here. It's been a long time. And you know what, guys, before I even get into the story, at first, not only is Nyasia my DOC sister, she is also my Pi Mu sister, and she's also my Cinco sister. So we have such a special connection. I was just so excited. I know y'all see me cheesing big crazy, right? Because I have the absolute pleasure of having her here as a guest. So Nyasia, let's get into it.
Yes,
Law
thank you for asking.
enforcement. What made you go into law enforcement?
Oh, wow, that one is really easy. So I want to say being a part of change is what made me go into law enforcement. You know what they say, if you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So I came into law enforcement with great intentions to help make change.
So was this something that you thought about like as a little girl? Was it a teenage thought process, or was it something that you just had an epiphany like when you turned like 20?
No, actually, it's been something that I wanted to do since I was a little girl. Initially, I wanted to go to college. I think I must have been about 12 years old when I realized that I wanted to be an officer. And I remember looking up like, how do I do this? And I think at that time there wasn't even an exam to become an officer, if I'm not mistaken. Well, I wouldn't say exam,
Girl,
but not
as
college
always,
credits
there was a
or college
right,
credits. I want to say college credits, like
maybe
the
college credits.
requirements, some of the requirements, and I think even at one point, because I have an aunt, a late aunt who she interviewed to be a part of NYPD. So I used to really, really look up to her. And I would ask like all of these questions because I grew up in an area where like the crime was high in the 90s, and I just wanted it to stop. Like, and I was just like, how do I help make that stop? Not knowing that I'm not going to be able to make it stop, but I definitely could be a part of the solution. So by the time I got into high school, I decided to join the armed forces and I went into the Navy. And coming out of the Navy, I made a decision, like once I became a mom, like what was going to make sense to me. So my first move into law enforcement, just to kind of get a feel if it was right for me, was NYPD. And after spending 12 years in NYPD as a civilian, but still having the ability to affect arrest and do all these things, I was just like, okay, wow, I can do this. So I made the lateral move into DOC because I understood that that's where a lot of the students in which we were dealing with at that time, at the position that I had for truancy and things of that nature, and working with school safety, I want to say uniform officers, I just kind of felt a need to figure out where are we going wrong with the youth. So they gave me an
Right.
opportunity to actually become an advisor for the Explorers program. And I enjoyed it so much. Oh God, I miss my Explorers, but I enjoyed it so much. They had a criteria at some point that we had to do background checks for the upcoming Explorers, which I kind of thought was a little unfair, understood why, but I always felt like children are redeemable because they're children.
Right.
So I made a decision, you know what? I think I want to go to DOC. And if I can work with the juveniles, then, I can understand what is happening with them outside if I can get inside. So I had very great intentions when I came into law enforcement. It was very strategic.
That sounds like you had that planned all the way out. I
It was
don't know
very
if I had
strategic.
mine planned like that. I just kind of just fell into it. So we're going to backtrack this a little bit. So armed forces came before law enforcement, yes?
Yes.
So what was that experience like? You are a vet. Thank you for your service.
You're welcome. So that was That was an amazing journey. It was very short lived because I became a mom. The experience of being a part of, the military, Navy branch, although I enjoyed it, it wasn't fulfilling my mission and my personal mission and my personal vision. There was no fulfillment there. It didn't. I understood very early that it was not going to be the thing to get me to what I felt purpose for so long before that. But I still kind of had to figure my way out in that because we're not dealing with the youth in armed
Hmm.
forces, and I understood that I had a calling on my life. So rather than, going beyond my contract, I decided, I'm not going to do that. I got to find my way to the
You
youth.
are so when you decided that you were going to not renew your contract in the military, and so I'm assuming at that point that's when you went into NYPD afterwards.
Yes. I want to say about a year later, I did. As I was saying,
Okay.
I'm not sure if the listeners heard, but it didn't fulfill my purpose, my personal mission and vision. Although it was something exciting and I thought that it was something that I could accomplish because I was always willing to challenge myself, but it just wasn't, hitting the way that I needed my career to hit while I was young.
So therefore, you went into PD like the year after you came out of the military. You decided, you were going to work as a civilian. You worked with the youth there. Then you took the test. It was just random, or you knew again strategically. Let me go be because what if you failed the test? Like, what was your next step going to be? Like, I just know I'm going to be a CO. Was that it?
Well, I want to say this, I'm a woman of God. So when the Holy Spirit speaks to me, I literally talk to God before I make any major moves or even small moves in my life. So I had a conversation with God about it and I was just like, yeah, and I gave God the desires of my heart and I had to wait to see if, God gave me the okay to move on it. So when he did, it was random for other people, but it wasn't random for me. I just went and I think I was supposed to report to work that day. I told them that I'll be in like 2 or 3 hours late. They approved it. I went and took the test. I took the test and I got my
Okay. So
score
you
on
you
the
was working
spot.
on PD time.
Yeah, listen,
Wonderful.
I took I had a lot of time because listen, I stayed at work. I enjoyed what I did. And
You disappeared. You
oh my goodness,
disappeared. There you go. Okay.
I enjoyed my time. And they definitely, approved the time that I asked for. I put in that request. And again, it was random for everyone else, but it wasn't random for me.
And not only were you so intentional, you said, not only am I going to be a CO, but I'm going to work with the youth. And you ended up at RNDC. Now, was
Absolutely.
that your first facility or did you request to go there? How did that, was that the facility that you were put in initially?
So I can remember in training, they had, some of the officers in the training academy, we had like this little wish list, kind of. And I was just like, where are the youth? And I was squad leader. I was the squad leader.
Of course.
I was the squad leader. So I was like, where are the youth? And they were like at the facility RNDC. I was like, that's where I want to go. And I remember being told, I won't mention any names, but I remember being told, why would you want to go there? And I said, because I'm going to make change. And it was like, if you think you're going to make change, you're absolutely wrong.
Now, guys, let me just tell you when she says about change. Now, this woman would walk around quoting scriptures to the young people in the RNDC facility, right? If I'm not
Absolutely.
mistaken.
Absolutely.
And tell us about that experience and what was the feedback and the reception that you received from the adolescents while you were there and preaching and not necessarily preaching, but giving them the word of God.
It was amazing because I understood my calling. And when they say when you get to the jails, be yourself. And I understood what that meant. So I was myself, and that was how I jailed. I would walk into a housing area, and especially on Sundays, if I was scheduled to work, they looked forward to having Bible study on Sundays. It gave them something to look forward to. It gave them hope. We would do prayer at night before the lock-in, so much that during the lock-in, they would try to prepare themselves, like Miss S is coming. We listen, y'all, we gotta pray. We gotta pray. Miss S, you gonna do prayer? And I had like these little scripture cards, and
Hmm.
and whoever God had called me to in that day to, to intercede for or to pray with, that's who I would give the card to. And I understood. And at first it was a little scary because we're not allowed to give them anything, unless it's from DOC. But I had to
Right.
follow what God was telling me to do in spite of, and know that I was going to be covered in that. So I had these little scripture cards, and they would get so excited, and they would lose if they could lose everything, but they had that card. They were in the intake, they had that card. They make their little they tuck their pants and roll it, and that card be under there. And if they lost that card, it was like, oh my goodness, where's Miss S? I need to speak to Miss S. And it was really good because a lot of the youth there, young adults as well, when we had some changes throughout the department, a lot of them would say, like, no one's ever prayed for me before. Or I've never heard prayer before. And not to my surprise, but to some other people's surprise, even in the most problematic areas, there were no incidents.
Because the Spirit of the Lord is
That's,
there.
listen, okay? But let's not be fooled too that sometimes there would be incidents. Like I would, do prayer, everything, and the kids would be like, they would feel the weight of it. Like, oh my goodness, how could we do this? Miss S, it had to happen. But, like we prayed today, like we were praying. And some of the youth there, they were like, I don't understand how you guys did this. Like we prayed, we were supposed to be strong in this, and they didn't understand the concept of how the enemy works, and the environment that they were in. But, I never not looked down on them, or I mean, I never looked down on them, or I never not gave them an opportunity to redeem themselves, in that manner. It was my way of jailing. Everybody had their own way of how they ran their housing area, but, mine was definitely pretty unique, some would say. And they appreciated it. They really appreciated it.
So, did you ever get any feedback or any criticism in the way that you chose to jail?
No, no, not one time. I would say there have been occasions where, a captain would come in and be like, why aren't they locked in? And then when she sees everybody in a circle and their hands out, and we're in prayer, they're like, well, they gotta lock in. They gotta lock in, Segura. You can't have them out past locking. And they were like, well, we didn't give any problems. And we just want to pray before we lock in. So much that they knew that that was my thing. If it was a little past, the lock in, until the next day, that 2100 hours, they understood, like, okay, as soon as they're done praying, she doesn't take long before they lock in. And it didn't take me long to make sure that they, were being held accountable for what it is they said that they wanted to do. So I also held them accountable for the responsibility of what it is that I was pushing out and pouring into them. And yeah, and it was good. And it was just so good, so much that there was a social service civilian. She called me up on post one day and she said, I understand that you're doing this project with your housing area. And she gave me some names and she said their lawyers want to see it. And it worked in their favor with their case because it literally helped with their behavior. It helped to, it was definitely a positive effect on how they perceive themselves to be who they are. So it was really about making them architects of their lives.
So let me ask you, in regards to the prayer, you know how they took the prayer out of schools and things of that nature, right? They don't want us
Mhm.
to pray. Do you think, in your personal opinion, that if we were to implement, not we, but the powers that be, were to implement prayer? Now they do. So in case some people don't know, the inmates are entitled to religious services. So they do have Catholic services, Muslim services, etc. And that is their choice, that they can go to those services. What makes it different when you actually partake in the service with the adolescents? And do you think if we were to do that same type of program with the adults, would it have been just as successful and beneficial?
Absolutely. Because there was a time where, I got transferred from R&DC because of the department was going through some changes. And I ended up going back to R&DC when the the juveniles were pushed out to Horizon. I didn't go right back to R&DC. I went to OBCC. And
Oh
it was
boy, that's my jail.
oh boy, I went to oh boy. And at that time we were, in a state of emergency, with COVID. And and they didn't have religious services. They didn't have it. They were restricted for a lot of the services due to the nature of how things were happening, for safety, reasons. And it didn't stop me. It didn't stop me from doing that in OBCC. Actually, it was I want to say just as effective, so much that they were like, oh, there goes the pastor. And I was like, hey guys, I am not a pastor. I am not a pastor. Disciple, I'll take that. But pastor, no, I just want to, share the word with anyone who's willing to listen. So much. I know that it worked that I can remember there was a young man, in my unit, and he had gotten some really bad news, and they had called for recreation at that time, and he didn't want to go, and I literally thought this gentleman was going to snatch the phone off the wall, and he was just in such anger and agony and pain, with the bad news that he received. I, gave him an opportunity to calm down, and my heart was beating because I was like, I feel like if I'm saying 2 words to this man, he going probably take my head off, but
Right.
God go before me, and God gave me what to do. And when I approached him, regarding his situation, I didn't really care about the particulars. I just wanted that individual to know that in spite of what's happening in your life, that there is a God, that provides. And I asked him, I was like, can I pray for you or with you? And he said, why? He said, look at me. I said, what am I looking at? He said, look at me. Look at all these tattoos on my face. Look where I am. Why would you want to pray for me? I said, well, am I supposed to see the tattoos? Am I supposed to see where we are? Or am I supposed to see a person? You're a person.
Right.
And with all due respect, I don't think that, Christ had his picks about who he particularly wanted to pray for, like, oh, you got tattoos. I can't show you grace. I can't give
Right.
you favor. I can't.
Right.
No, so I said, so it's not up to me to pass judgment on you based off of how you look. So if you're willing and you're open to it, I will pray for you. And he said, after we were done praying, it's so funny. As soon as we were done, recreation was over, and he just cried and he said, I never had a cop pray for me before. I don't understand it. I don't understand this. And I said, well, one day you will. I said, but he said, I'll never see an officer the same. I'll never see officers the same. I thought you were all alike.
And
And I
here
think that
is right exactly what I'm saying. This is the reason why I have to do this, right? Because people do not see us as human. They see us in a uniform. They think we are all the same. They think, because there are some bad apples, right? But, the saying goes, the bad apples will not spoil the whole bunch, even though it's reversed, right?
mm,
But when you do come in contact with a person and they receive grace or they receive something that they've never received before coming from a person in the realm of a law enforcement officer or personnel anyway that they deem us, it has to have a very jarring effect on them, right? Especially if they're career criminals. They're like, what's going on? So I can only imagine that young man, his life had to be touched because, as you said, he's never had that happen before. And it may not have even just been the law enforcement aspect, the police, the correctional officers. He may have never had anyone to pray for him at all,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely,
So, and that's why he cried.
yeah,
And by you being in the position that you were in and touching so many people, because the outside world tends to say they're animals, they're criminals. That's not our judgment to a certain degree, right? We
right,
don't pass judgment. Correction officers, we are there to provide care, custody, and control.
absolutely,
It's not our job to say what their crime is, how much time they should get for their crimes. That's not our job. Our job is to maintain their safety and to make sure that they're being produced for court until they get whatever the law says they are supposed to get. But in the meantime, they are actually innocent until proven guilty. That's what the law says.
Absolutely.
So people need to understand they should be treated as such now,
Yeah, that's correct.
providing grace. But
Yeah.
moving aside from that, so after you went to Old Boy, Nigel, I got to say that again. Wait, let me do my little gunshot. So after you went back from Old Boy, then you went back to RNDC. You had some, family things that you had going on with, I believe, family member took ill. I don't know how much you want to elaborate with
My
that,
mom.
but you
Yeah,
made,
my mom.
and I know with the department, it was very difficult. You had some very difficult decisions to make in regards to your work, your daughter as well, right? So there was a period
Absolutely.
in this time that you had to make some choices because you're torn from your family and your job. So do you want to just talk a little bit like how this all came to be a bit?
Yeah, sure. So, my mom and my daughter, they were both dealing with similar autoimmune compromise situations. And meanwhile, I did enjoy, the work that I did at DOC because I knew who I was doing it for. I understood I had a purpose there. But I also had to understand that my home is my first ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very tough decision. Tough, so tough that I think I must have spent a year trying to figure out, what would be the best thing for me to do. And of course, a lot of it, because we can get very comfortable with our paychecks, right? Our coins. We can get very comfortable with those
Yes.
coins, right? And, but I had to come to the realization that if I could render so much time and care to those outside my home, then I had to also find the balance to give the same back to my family. And because we were so low in staff, it never really created an opportunity for me to be as available to my mom and my daughter as much as they needed me. So I had to make the
Mm-hmm.
hard decision, and so hard that I even wrote a little something that says women on the other side of the gates. Who am I?
Mm.
Who am I? What am I? And how did I become the woman on the other side of the gates? You know? And what happened to me when I walked into the other side of the gates? And did I ever truly leave the other side of the gates? And that was me. Those questions almost was like rhetorical question. It's like it's not that I know the answer to the questions, but for me, it was like, hey, friendly reminder, you know,
Mm-hmm.
check yourself. Check yourself in all of this. You got to check off all your boxes, your personal boxes for yourself. Because yeah, I know who I am. I know who I belong to. I know, I'm very confident in my identity that who I belong to. I belong to Christ. So with that being said, that he's the stuff giver, he's the provider, he is the waymaker, he is my banner, he goes before me. He's the creator of my life, the beginning and the ending. He's the author. So with that, there was nothing left to be said. I had to take that leap, and that grew my faith. So there was a point in that where, although I was on an assignment behind the gates in
Mm-hmm.
DOC, I also had an assignment outside of that. And what I didn't realize initially, that God was stretching me. He was
Mm.
stretching me, and he was giving me an opportunity to increase my faith. So that's the moment in my life where the floor, my ceiling became the floor. I elevated in the spirit. So I went through that spiritual growth in that time while I was kind of like trying to figure that part out. Like, God, what do you need me to do? Because you gave me this assignment. You put me on this path. You had me to spread the gospel while I was working. You gave me the shield so that I can do what you called me to do. Is my assignment over? And he said, your assignment is over.
And that's a really good point right there, right? People have to understand when their assignment is over because I think that's when the turmoil sets in. Like you're conflicted because you're like, I'm supposed to be doing this, but nobody said you had to continue to do something forever. There comes an end and needs growth. So
Absolutely.
it's very important for people to understand and identify when their assignment is over.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody assignment. I know we go in with the intentions that we're going to do our 20 or 22 and a half, and we're going to
Mhm.
retire and we're going to be well. And we make all these provisions and we're trying to be strategic about our finances and things of that nature. But God didn't want me to do things in chrono order at all. He wanted me to do things in Kairos order.
I hear
And
that.
and with that being said, I understood then that, you know what, I'm gonna take that leap. And I walked in and I said, I need to resign. And they were like, Are you kidding me? You're almost at the end. You have
And how many
19 years.
19 years, that's what I was
19
gonna
years.
say.
19 years. What are you doing? You're losing. And the Holy Spirit said, No, you're not losing. I won't ever let you lose. Anytime I give you something to do, you're never taking a loss. It may look like a loss to everyone else because the assignment for them is supposed to look one way, but you understand that I don't work in chrono order. So with that being said, God released me from that. And I had to take that leap. I had to take the leap and be very intentional about what God was telling me to do. And it definitely wasn't easy. It was scary as ever, but I took the leap.
And
Yep.
before we transition into what you leaped into, tell the people, we're gonna just go back to DOC for a quick moment before you exit out all the way.
Uh,
Tell the people what was now, you guys kind of get a feel. This is how she is all the time. Like this smile, she's bubbly. She just walks like you can't even be mad around this girl. Like you be like, she'll be like, sis. And she just start talking and she will definitely pray. She will pray for you anywhere. Anywhere. She be like, no, no, just come on. We're gonna pray for it right now. So y'all
That's
just
right.
understand when I tell you this is a woman of God and a woman of faith. But because I'm gonna say, what was a bad day? And I really can't even say it was a bad day for you because there really is no bad days. But what was a bad day for you in DOC? Like a day that you'll be like, oh my God, like it pushed you at your breaking point. What would that day be for you?
Wow. I would say the bad day for me was the day I want to say this correctly. An officer passed me contraband to give to an inmate. That was the bad day for me.
Are you kidding me?
It was hidden in a brown bag. And, this officer worked in a support area. And she said, well, I have some items from laundry to give to the individual. And I said, okay, no problem. And, she was always a nice person. And you working this weekend? Yeah, I'm working. And she said, no, I'm not working. I said, well, enjoy your weekend. And, she said, you be safe. I said, okay, no problem. And I guess, for a moment, um, you know, I want to trust my peers, you know,
Absolutely.
I want to trust my peers. So I didn't initially take a look in the bag when she gave it to me while she was there. But when she exited the area and I was the A officer at the time, I buzzed her out. I closed my A door and I opened the bag. I called the floor officer and I said, you haven't this individual. He has some items from laundry. Can you please call him to the A station so that I can give him, we call it the bubble, call him to the bubble, you know, so that I can give him his items. But as he was trying to locate the individual in the housing area between whether he was at his cell at an option or in the day room, I opened the bag and I started going through the items,
Right,
it's
right,
what I
right,
do. And it's what we're supposed to do, right?
right,
And I know some people get so comfortable, they're just like, "Oh, yeah, here, give this to this person," looking
right,
to
right,
peek, take a
right,
peek and give it to the person. But, I really believed in doing my job every day as if it was my first day, So I opened the bag and I emptied everything out and I started feeling through the t-shirts and the boxers, and behold, in the socks, it felt a little heavier than these are socks, like
right, right,
they're
right,
brand
right,
new, they're not rolled up, they're not. So yeah, and it was contraband in the sock, and I had to call it in, and that broke my heart. I think that was, because the individuals that are in our custody, they're gonna do what they do to be
right,
expected, right? So I can't really say those are the bad days. So the bad day for me was the moment I had to make that call immediately and say, hey, yeah, one of my peers is just dropped this off. And it didn't make it to the what they call now PICs, person in custody.
Right.
It didn't make it to the floor, and I have to call it in, you know. And what made it more disappointing is because she wanted to know, why didn't I call her back to let her know that that's what I found? That is not protocol. So that also made me feel like, okay, what is happening? You know,
Right.
and how it can get you caught up in so many ways. But, you know, however that went, you know, in terms of how, you know, whatever actions the department felt the need to take and how the investigation went, I won't release that. But I will say that was a moment for me that was a bad day, because that
And I
is
would
not
definitely have
something,
to agree with you.
yeah, that's not
To
something
have
that
to
actually,
turn in your coworker, the ones, the ones that smile in your face. I think for me one time, I was very new on the job, and they would, at roll call, they have a tendency to make examples out of people. And there was a gentleman at roll call, and he was standing right next to me, and his name began with the same initial. And when I heard that, I was like, what's going on? I was like, what these people calling me? What's going on? And it was a gentleman there, and he was caught bringing in contraband. He was a heavy gambler, and he owed a lot of people some money. And the way he needed to retrieve that money was doing some things that he should not have been doing. So, unfortunately, there are some, like I said before, there are some bad apples, right? But it's a few. It's not
yeah.
all. So I can only imagine how you felt in that moment, because it's like, damn, sis, like, why I gotta do you making me do this, and then you mad at me because I had to do it, but
And
you
yeah,
did it to yourself.
and it wasn't so much that she was just upset with me. Anyone that was connected to her at work and that had an actual closer relationship with her, because, you know, we were like on hi bye, hello, how are you? Just very
Right,
pleasant.
right, right.
You know, and of course she had like a deeper rapport relationship. I would say I had a good rapport with her, but she had, you know, relationships. She's built relationships, long-term relationships with people that worked in the facility with us, and their relationships had so much time that they were upset with me. So I had to walk around every day at work with people like kind of like making me feel like I've done something wrong. And, you know, and I just thank God that he you know, he strengthened me to still be able to walk and hold my head up high and walk through the corridors and continue to do, you know, what I was called to do. Because at the end of the day, you know, we all have a responsibility and we have to be held accountable for what we do, because what we do is serious.
It is. It is. And again, I apologize that you had to go through that, because I can only imagine the tension, how that is walking through the corridors, them long hallways. And luckily, thanks to the Most High, you didn't have to have no uses of force, because you imagine they be mad at you and they be like, oh, we're going to take our time to respond there. It's the Segure. Yeah, we're going to take our time to get
Listen,
there.
listen, and you know what? And I've had uses of force in the same area. And I've had, and it's so much that, you know, the individuals, like the PICs, the persons in custody, like whatever housing units they were in, they were like, oh, Miss S, you a rat. You a rat. And I said, let me tell you something. There are no secrets in DOC. There are no
Mm-hmm.
secrets in DOC. So you call me what you want to call me. But I promise you, Miss S, meanwhile, is a woman of God. But I also understand the laws I need to follow while I'm here. So I follow
Mm-hmm.
too. And that's the spiritual law. And this is DOC's. I'm not compromising either one of them for anybody. So whatever you feel you have to do, I understand. But I promise you, I'll come out of this squeaky clean.
And you did.
And I
And
did.
you did, boo.
And
Clock
I
it.
did. Yes. And I did.
So now, so now that we had to talk about that horrible, horrible experience, tell me about the good day. What was one of the? I know you had several. So tell me, what day in your mind right now comes to your mind right now as your one of your, or the best day in the Department of Correction.
The best day was when someone was suicidal. Actually, it was two in the same day. The first one, he was suicidal. He didn't show any signs that we were trained to see,
Mm-hmm.
but he stuck very close to me, which told me after the fact of everything that, oh wow, you didn't want to attempt this. You didn't want to attempt, you know, to take your own life. You were really battling with something. And I think it was my past day, and I came back and he says to me, do you know that the last time you were here, you saved my life? And I said, did I? He said, yep, you saved my life, because if you weren't here, I don't know if I would have been here. And I said, wow. And just like, you don't know what you do because you just do what you do because you know you're supposed to. And as I was touring in the this wasn't a cell area. So, as I'm touring, I'm just like, it hit me like, wait, what did I do? And when I was done with my tour, he said, I know you're wondering how you did that. And I said, yeah, it's come across my mind.
Right.
And he said, you just gave me the word to hold on to. And it just happened to be the word my mama and my grandma told me to hold on to when I just feel like I can't no more. He said, and you just came with that word one day. That particular day, rather, that particular day. That is the word that I shared with him. And he said, and I took my shower and I just cried. And I came out and I said, this can only be God. And this, because how would you know the scripture that my grandma and my mom always give me when I go into that mode of depression where I just feel like I can't bear life anymore? It is the only scripture that I have, in my heart from them. And I couldn't hear from them that day because I believe that we were on lockdown. So he couldn't hear from any of his
'Cause he
family
couldn't
at
use
that
the
time because
phone.
the phones was right, because the phones were off.
Right.
And he just like, and you just came with that scripture. And he said, and it just saved me. He was like, and the thing is this, he said, I ended up getting some mail from my mom and she gave me a book by Joyce Myers that says, Do It Afraid. And he said, and I read the entire book while you were, wherever you were, because he didn't know it was my past days. He just know that we rotate in and out,
Right,
He
right,
said,
right,
while
right,
you
right.
were, wherever you were. And he said, and I read the whole book. He was like, and I don't know how you do it afraid. I don't know how you do it while you're here. But he said, but I want to tell you that you are definitely doing it afraid. And he said, and thank you. And I can remember that particular day he was talking about how I was stuck for overtime. And in OBCC in the seg, going towards the seg area, the seg intake, they had the two cells outside the seg intake and two individuals. They had some type of, I don't even remember if, I think it was from the linen. They used the linen. They shredded the linen to make this rope and they threw it over the gate. And the idea was that if they jumped together, because they had nothing else to hang it onto, but that if they jumped together, that they both can take their lives at the same time. And I must have stood there. One of the two requested for me because I had him as an adolescent. And he knew that, I share scripture and I pray. So he requested for me. So they called me over. Instead of me going to post, they called me to that area to have a conversation with him. And that was like the best day too, because, that was like a 2-for-1 deal. Neither one of them took their lives in that day. I mean, it took a lot of, it, I think I'm
IPC
spent,
skills.
yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
IPC. And I couldn't, and at some point, I couldn't even IPC the way the department needed me to. I had to do it in a way where they know they're used to me. This person, this individual, if I can get through to this one, with the understanding that that piece of linen was wrapped on the other side, that even if the other one jumped, that this other one was going to potentially get hurt. If I can just get through to one, even if the other one tried, he didn't have a chance to take his own life because then he
Because they
would have
had to do
taken
it
it off.
together.
They had to do
Right.
it together in order to create the weight. So I spoke to who I knew requested for me, and I was able to talk him out of it. So that was 2 lives saved, and I was happy with that. And I just like, can I go to post now? Now I want to go.
But
Now
you
I
went
want to go
to
to
but
post.
you would listen, you don't work that was a double. That was a
Listen,
double in itself. You thought you was
what?
gonna go to post, wipe down your little aid station, sit down and
Listen,
do your count.
listen.
No, that wasn't happening today. That wasn't the assignment for the day. You had a
This
two-parter. Yeah.
I said, "Oh my goodness!" But it was good, and a lot of people kind of like made a big deal, like, "How come you didn't get recognized for it? How come you should be recognized for this?" But I I don't do what I do for recognition from the people around me. I do it because again, it's part of my personal mission. Peopling is part of my mission. Making people feel good about themselves, making people better, and helping people to heal back to a place where they are struggling. That is giving people hope. You know, that is my mission. So the reward is if you could save someone, that is the reward. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with it. So and I was just like, God, thank you. Like thank you for giving me, with that. Yeah. So those were my happy moments in DOC because honestly, I know happy moments could honestly seem we could easily say the time I actually got a chance to go home and didn't have to do overtime. I finally
Baby,
got a
because they
chance to
will
get
lock
out and
you
see
in
sunlight.
there.
Right. You come
What?
in, it's dark, you leave and it's dark. You looking like what day is it? But, but
I
we
don't
can
miss
say
those
that.
days. I don't miss those days. But on a brighter note, so you turned in your shield. You said, "Listen, my assignment here is completed. Um, I'm stepping out on faith." And you always wanted to help people, and it's always been in your path, every step you took. So it didn't stop at DOC. So what are we doing, and what transpired after you left?
So after I left, I just kind of stayed focused on my mom and my daughter. But again, because at the time that I left, financially, whatever I had saved up, I knew that it was going to potentially run out like really quickly. And I'm not eligible for my pension for, up until my time that I'm supposed to
Right.
commit to the department is actually up. And of course, I had other things set up, but that takes time as well. So I kind of sat with God about it and I was just like, I need to be able to take care of my mom and I need to be able to take care of my daughter, God. And you as the provider, what shall you have me to do? As my provider, what shall you have me to do? How do I get this balance but do what you called me to do at home? And I can remember a week later after turning in my shield, I had gotten a just kind of like a email, random email. And I looked at the email and I was just like, oh, okay, bypassing time. And it was for a mental health clinical specialist. And I was just like, let me see what the hours are like. And I was like, nope, I'm not going to jump into anything without asking God first. Before I get ahead of myself, because if God pulled me away from one thing, it's not meant for me to just jump right back into something else. So I just
Right.
kind of like went on, the venture of, planning my youth and leadership and development organization and saying, okay, now it's time to, walk this thing out. This is my business. This is
Mm-hmm.
what I'm desiring to do. And now I have the time to dedicate the time that I want to my youth, to the ministry, to the family. So I kind of like started, looking at what the strategy was going to be for that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just something about that position, that just kept making me kind of go back to it. And when I looked at, what they required, it reminded me in that moment because for a really quick moment, when you walk away from something that you spent so much of your life and time in, you tend to miss it. You tend to feel like, what am I doing?
Right.
You start looking at like, how did I begin this? In spite of what your relationship with the Lord is, you're still human too. You're still
Mm-hmm.
human too. So you start to wow, but I spent so much time. And although I'm reminded of everything, like, how is this going to even work? So I immediately had to lock in and just kind of sit with myself. And some people may call it isolation, and isolation is good. But then I also reached out to my mentor, which is something that I always believe as adults that we should have. We should have someone that could mentor us who's been, in the field a lot longer than us to help us navigate those things in our life that, we kind of feel like we're losing our footing on.
Right.
And I spoke to my mentor about it. And I told him about the youth leadership and development organization that I'm working on. And he's just like, you've been in leadership for a long time and, you're my mentee. And listen, I think you're ready. Go for it. And I said, but wait, this position, keep my eye on this position. He said, my goodness, you just stepped out of DOC. It's only been a week. I said, I know. He said, you ready to put boots on the ground already? I said, I'm ready to work,
Mm-hmm.
because I just understood. And yeah, and I applied to the position and about a week, I want to say a week later, I got an interview And then I want to say following the interview about a week later, I got an offer letter and they asked me to work their youth ED department, which is the emergency department for mental health and psychiatry in the hospital. So, and here I am.
So look at that. Helping people again. Helping the youth again. So, with that being said, what would you say to people who are currently working DOC and, this is their bread and butter? They're apprehensive in leaving because they don't know what their tomorrow will look like if they actually stepped away. But they're stuck in chaos. They have family that's sick, marriages, relationships are failing. There could be a cluster of things that's going on and they're hesitant. So what would you give those people? What advice would you give them to say as far as leaving as you did in your 19th year, which I know I couldn't have done that. I was like, I would have just stuck out that year, girl. I would have. But, when God tell you to do something, your steps are ordered and you follow direction and you went about your business. So what would you tell those people who are right there at that breaking point? And yeah, what would you tell them?
I believe that we can't hold on to anything too tight. Eventually, you hold on to something tight enough, you'll choke it out.
Mm-hmm.
And once you choke that particular thing out, then there's nothing left to it. And that means that your grip is so tight on what you have that something else is failing. And you understand that it's failing, but you're so afraid that how stepping away because of what you're used to is working only for the smaller part. The smaller part. And for some people, finances is not the small part. It's the bigger part. And I understand that for some people, because some people just have that thing like, no, my money is without my money, I don't have nothing.
Right.
It depends on what your beliefs are, but eventually you will lose your grip. So you have to allow yourself to, before you choke the things out that are most important, for the things that are most important, you're eventually going to lose one of them. And you have to figure out which one you're willing to lose. So you have to be willing to be uncomfortable again with the thing that's going to grow you, the very thing that's going to support you, the very thing that's going to cultivate you, the very thing that's going to give you the peace that you're looking for. And until you are okay with being comfortable with being uncomfortable, you're always going to feel like this is all I have. And from my experience in DOC, there are a lot of talented officers in DOC, men and women. They are very talented, very educated. They come from all kind of wonderful backgrounds. And I say, use that to your leverage. Use that to your leverage. Allow that to be the building blocks, part of the building blocks for your foundation, so that you can continue to build where happiness lives. Otherwise, you're going to sacrifice everything, your family, health, be it mental health, physical health, the health of whatever it is, anything that's very important to you. You're going to end up making the trade. It's going to be like a trade. And you don't want to trade off your family. You don't want to trade off your health. You don't want to trade off anything that sustains you for $1, and you have to be willing with yourself to say, if I started out here in DOC, what makes me think that I can't? Because people are afraid to do it, to start over. They call it starting over. But I don't think about it as starting over. This is, for me, it's a continuation. But again, you got to ask yourself, who am I? Who was I before I came here?
Right.
Who was I? And did I become something else when I got here? And
Well, that can happen.
right, because
They may not
right,
have realized what they were when they stepped in that space. Then
absolutely,
they evolved while they were in that space. Now
absolutely,
they're torn, because they
yeah.
think if I leave, like you said, it's their coins, they making that money,
Mhm.
and they're able to buy whatever they want, but they're sacrificing so much.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I
yeah.
can definitely understand that.
Yeah. So I would say, in life, you got to be willing to pivot. And I think that's, a lot of times that's what success looks like. You're taking a chance. We take chances every day we go to work. We step in the jails, right? We took a chance. You and I, we took a chance
Every
every
day.
day.
Every day.
They told us, and we understood as we, got our feet in the door, like, this job is not yours until you retire. because anything can happen and you can lose it
Anything.
like that. So, with that in mind, if you are going to a place where that those are the chances that you're taking, why not take the chance on yourself, but just in a different way? Navigate that in a different way. And and again, some people are they're applying old strategies to new things, and you can't
Right.
apply old strategies to new things. You got to be very strategic about what it is that you want, and you got to be willing to pivot. You got to be willing to pivot. You got to be willing to say, like it's my turn to level up. It's my turn, and leveling up doesn't always look like money. It doesn't.
Right.
It's experiences, it's
Right.
building a platform for yourself. It's not waiting for somebody to give you a seat at the table, but creating your own table, and then you get to choose who you want at the table.
Right.
Those kind of things. And with that being said, I could only say, you just got to be willing to take the chance, just the way you're taking the chance every time you walk through those doors and go behind the gate.
Well, I want you to know, Nyasia, you have inspired so many people, and I can't say it enough about how your light shines. Like just being in talking to you and being around you, the energy radiate off of you, and
Thank
I'm sure
you.
that the inmates appreciated it, the staff appreciated it, but you had to do what you had to do for yourself. And with that being
Absolutely.
said, you found a way, you listened, and you obeyed what you believed that God said, these are my instructions. Your assignment is over and you will thrive in the next chapter of your life.
Yeah,
And that's what you are doing. And
that's
you are
what I'm
doing it
telling.
so beautifully.
Thank you very
Now,
much.
we're gonna close because we've been chit chatting, because we could go on and on. I just want y'all to know, me and her could just talk, just so y'all know. But we're gonna close out, and I just want you to give any last words of wisdom to any young person who is thinking about going into the career of law enforcement. What advice you would give them at this time?
I think that I would give them the advice to walk into law enforcement to become refined. Let the fire refine them because they're going to go through the fire. Don't be afraid to have someone help cultivate them. Be teachable. Be very teachable so that those things can happen. And when you do that, you won't fall for anything. You'll stand for something.
Well, I couldn't have said it better than myself. But ladies and gentlemen, I want you to give it up. Here's my little cheer button again. Here y'all. I'm like a big kid with these little buttons. But thank you so much, Nyasia, for coming on.
You are
You
most
are a
welcome. Thank
blessing,
you.
and
Thank
you
you for
know
having
that I
me.
absolutely love you. And we're
I
gonna
love you
always be
too.
here for you to be supportive. And once you get your organization fully up and operational, we will be here to talk about that again. So thank you so very much. And
Thank you.
ladies and gentlemen, I hope to see you again on When the Glue Comes Off.